Rest doesn't feel like rest. It feels like you're getting away with something. Saying no triggers the same reaction, even when you have a valid reason, even when you're already overwhelmed, even when no one is pressuring you. The word no sticks in your throat, and if you do say it, you immediately feel the need to explain yourself, soften it, or make up for it later. You tell yourself things like, "I'll help this one last time. It's easier if I just handle it. They need me more than I need rest right now." And in the moment, that logic feels reasonable, responsible even. But notice the pattern. Your needs are always postponed, your energy is always negotiable, and rest becomes something you have to justify instead of something you're allowed to take. Carl Jung touched on this inner conflict when he said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." For many people, rest forces that confrontation. When you stop doing, helping, fixing, and producing, you're left with yourself, without distractions, without usefulness as proof of worth. And if your sense of value is tied to what you give, stillness can feel uncomfortable. So you stay busy, you stay available, you stay useful. In daily life, this looks like pushing through fatigue because someone might need you. It looks like answering messages even when you're drained. It looks like agreeing to things automatically, then feeling resentment afterward and blaming yourself for feeling that way. What's really happening is that guilt has replaced choice. You're not deciding based on capacity anymore. You're deciding based on fear. Fear of letting people down. Fear of being seen as selfish. Fear of what it might mean if you stop performing your role. Jung warned about living from external approval when he said, "When an inner situation is not made conscious, it appears outside as fate. If you don't question this guilt, it starts running your life quietly. You don't choose rest, you wait until your body forces it. You don't set boundaries, you wait until you're overwhelmed enough to withdraw completely. And the irony is, the more you ignore your limits, the harder it becomes to recognize them. You stop trusting your own fatigue. You second-guess your need for space. You tell yourself others have it worse, so you should be able to handle more. But guilt is not a reliable signal. It doesn't measure what you can give. It measures what you've been conditioned to give. This sign matters because it keeps you trapped in self-drain without obvious warning signs. You're not collapsing. You're functioning. You're showing up. But you're doing it at the cost of yourself. And if this continues long enough, something shifts. The guilt doesn't disappear. It turns into quiet resentment. You start feeling irritated without knowing why. You feel unappreciated even when people thank you. That's when the next warning sign begins to surface, where calm on the outside starts hiding frustration underneath. Sign 3. You're calm on the outside, resentful on the inside. This is what happens when you've been swallowing too much for too long. On the surface, you look composed, reasonable, easy to deal with. You're the person who doesn't make a scene, doesn't raise their voice, doesn't create problems. People often describe you as mature or understanding. And you take pride in that, because staying calm feels like control. But inside, something else is happening. There's a quiet irritation that shows up at unexpected moments, a sharp reaction to small things, a heaviness after interactions that didn't seem intense. You tell yourself you're fine, yet your patience is thinner than it used to be. You feel annoyed, then immediately judge yourself for feeling that way. This resentment doesn't come from being unkind. It comes from being consistently over-accommodating. You keep your opinions to yourself to avoid tension. You let things slide because it's not worth it. You agree outwardly while internally wishing someone would notice how much you're giving up. And every time you choose silence over honesty, something inside you tightens just a little more. Carl Jung described this inner divide when he said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." In psychological terms, what you don't express doesn't disappear. It gets stored. And stored frustration doesn't stay neutral. It turns into resentment. What makes this sign so confusing is that you don't see yourself as resentful. You still care, you still help, you still show up. So when irritation leaks out, it feels out of character, even alarming. You wonder, why am I so bothered by this? Or why am I suddenly so tired of everyone? The answer is usually accumulation. In daily life, this looks like saying yes while mentally counting how many times you've done the same favor. It looks like smiling during a conversation while feeling drained the moment it ends. What if the reason you're exhausted isn't because you're weak or doing too much, but because you're constantly giving parts of yourself away without noticing it? You show up, you help, you hold things together, and yet somehow you're the one who ends the day feeling empty. Stay with me, because one of these signs hides so well that most people don't realize it until burnout hits. If you're usually the reliable one, the calm one, the person others lean on, this might hit closer than you expect. This isn't about blaming anyone, and it's not about telling you to stop caring. It's about understanding what happens when caring quietly turns into self-erasure. Carl Jung once said, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself, as well as others, think one is." When you spend too long being who everyone needs, you can lose touch with who you actually are. And the scary part is, it doesn't feel dramatic. It feels normal. Let's talk about the emotional warning signs that show you might be draining yourself for others, without even realizing it. Sign 1. You feel responsible for other people's emotions. This one is subtle, which is why it's so dangerous. You don't walk around thinking, "I'm responsible for how everyone feels." It just shows up in your behavior. You replay conversations in your head, wondering if you said something wrong. You soften your opinions before you even speak. You read the room constantly, adjusting yourself to keep things calm, not because anyone explicitly asked you to, but because somewhere along the way you learned that harmony depends on you. Think about how often you catch yourself doing emotional math. If I say this, they might feel uncomfortable. If I don't respond right away, they might feel ignored. If I'm honest right now, this could create tension. So you manage it, you smooth it over, you carry it. In everyday situations, this looks harmless. You listen longer than you have energy for because you don't want someone to feel unheard. You downplay your frustration because you don't want to ruin the mood. You apologize quickly, even when you're not sure what you did wrong, just to reset the emotional balance. Over time, this turns into a reflex. You start monitoring other people's reactions more closely than your own. Your internal question becomes, "Are they okay?" instead of, "Am I okay?" Carl Jung warned about this internal split when he said, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases." But when you take responsibility for other people's emotional comfort, you act as if there is a single correct way to behave, and that it's your job to perform it. The cost shows up quietly. You feel tired after conversations that didn't seem difficult. You feel tense even in neutral situations, because you're always on alert. You feel relief when people are happy, not because you're happy too, but because the pressure finally eases for a moment. And here's the part most people miss. This isn't the same as empathy. Empathy is understanding how someone feels. Responsibility is believing it's your job to fix it. When you confuse the two, your emotional boundaries disappear. Someone else's disappointment feels like your failure. Someone else's bad mood feels like something you caused. Even silence starts to feel threatening, as if you need to fill it before it turns into something uncomfortable. Jung captured this loss of inner authority when he said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." If you're constantly managing emotions outside of yourself, you never have to sit with what's happening inside you. And that avoidance can feel productive, even noble, but it's draining. Over time, you stop trusting your own reactions. You hesitate before expressing needs. You wonder if you're being too much simply for having feelings at all. And the irony is, the more you carry for others, the less space there is for you. This sign matters because it's often the first one to appear. It doesn't look like burnout. It looks like being considerate. It looks like being mature. It looks like being the person everyone relies on. But if you listen closely, there's a quiet signal underneath it all. A constant tension, a low-level exhaustion, a sense that you're always slightly bracing yourself. And if you ignore that signal long enough, it leads directly into the next warning sign, where guilt replaces choice, and rest starts to feel like something you haven't earned yet. Sign 2. You feel guilty when you rest or say no. This sign doesn't show up as exhaustion at first. It shows up as guilt. Quiet, persistent guilt that kicks in the moment you try to slow down. You finally get a break, and instead of feeling relieved, your mind starts racing. You think about what you should be doing, who you might be disappointing, what you're falling behind on. It looks like feeling underappreciated even when no one has technically done anything wrong. You may also notice a shift in how you relate to people. You become emotionally distant without meaning to. You listen, but with less openness. You help, but with less warmth. Not because you've changed, but because your emotional reserves are depleted. Jung warned about this kind of internal imbalance when he said, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good." Ignoring what you feel doesn't make you more balanced. It creates pressure, and pressure always looks for a way out. Sometimes it comes out as sarcasm, sometimes as withdrawal, sometimes as sudden anger that surprises even you. And afterward, you feel guilty again, reinforcing the cycle. Suppress, resent, release, regret. The most painful part of this sign is that it makes you feel disconnected from yourself. You no longer trust your reactions. You don't know if you're being fair or overreacting. You start doubting your right to feel frustrated at all. But resentment is not a flaw. It's information. It points directly to where you've been crossing your own limits. If you don't listen to it, the calm you present to the world becomes a performance, and the longer you perform, the harder it becomes to remember what honesty even feels like. This is where many people get stuck, appearing steady, while slowly burning out inside. And if this pattern continues, it leads to the next warning sign, where something even more unsettling happens. You stop knowing what you actually want, because you've spent too long prioritizing everyone else's comfort over your own. Sign 4. You don't know what you want anymore. This sign feels quieter than the others, but it cuts deeper. Someone asks you a simple question, "What do you want?" And instead of an answer, there's a pause. Not because you're being thoughtful, but because nothing comes up. Your mind scans for a response, and all it finds are obligations, expectations, and what would be easiest for everyone else. You might notice this in small moments. Choosing becomes exhausting. You default to "I don't mind" or "whatever works." Not because you're flexible, but because tuning into your own preference feels unfamiliar, sometimes even uncomfortable. This doesn't happen overnight. It's the result of years of adjustment. You've trained yourself to respond instead of initiate, to adapt instead of assert. Slowly, your inner signals get quieter, not because they're gone, but because they've been ignored for too long. Carl Jung spoke directly to this loss of inner direction when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But when your sense of self is built around being needed, becoming yourself feels secondary. Other people's priorities shape your days, and your own wants get pushed to the margins. In everyday life, this looks like feeling oddly disconnected during free time. You finally have space, yet you don't know how to use it. You scroll, distract yourself, or wait for someone else to decide. Freedom feels empty instead of energizing. You may also notice that your goals feel vague or borrowed. You pursue things because they seem practical, expected, or useful, but not because they feel meaningful to you. And when you reach them, the satisfaction fades quickly, leaving you wondering why you bothered in the first place. Jung warned about this kind of inner drift when he said, "If the path before you is clear, you're probably on someone else's." When you lose touch with what you want, it's often because your choices have been shaped by external approval rather than internal clarity. What makes this sign especially unsettling is the self-doubt it creates. You start questioning whether you're allowed to want more, or anything at all. You wonder if your uncertainty means you're ungrateful or indecisive, instead of recognizing it as a signal of long-term self-neglect. So you keep going. You keep fulfilling roles. You keep meeting needs. And the more you do, the harder it becomes to hear yourself. But not knowing what you want doesn't mean there's nothing there. It means your voice has been crowded out. This sign matters because it's a turning point. When desire fades, motivation follows. Life becomes functional instead of alive. You're doing what's required, but not what's chosen. And if this continues, it leads to the final warning sign, one that feels especially painful because it contradicts everything you've been told. Even though people rely on you, you start to feel invisible. Sign 5. You feel invisible even when you're needed. This is often the moment when something finally feels wrong. People come to you. They ask for your help, your time, your attention. You're included when something needs to be handled, solved, or supported. On the surface, it looks like connection. But underneath, there's a strange emptiness, like you're present, but not really seen. You might notice this after interactions that should feel meaningful. Conversations end, and instead of feeling close, you feel hollow. You've listened, responded, and helped, yet something essential was missing. It's not that others are ungrateful. It's that your role has replaced your presence. Over time, people start recognizing what you provide more than who you are. They know you're reliable, steady, available. But they don't ask how you're doing in a way that invites honesty. And if they do, you often answer automatically, keeping things light, keeping things easy. Carl Jung captured this kind of isolation when he said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important." When you've trained yourself to focus on others, your inner world stays hidden, not just from them, but from you as well. In everyday situations, this invisibility shows up quietly. You're part of conversations, but you don't feel involved. You contribute, but your input doesn't feel valued beyond its usefulness. You're remembered when something is needed, and forgotten when it isn't. This can create a painful contradiction. You're surrounded by interaction, yet you feel alone. You matter in function, but not in essence. And the more this happens, the more you start pulling back. Not dramatically, but subtly. You share less. You invest less emotionally. You expect less. What makes this sign especially heavy is that it can make you question your own importance. You start wondering if you're simply forgettable or if something is missing in you. But the truth is usually the opposite. You've made yourself so accommodating that there's no friction for others to notice you fully. Jung warned about this kind of self-erasure when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." If you remain invisible to yourself, if your needs, thoughts, and boundaries stay unspoken, others will unknowingly follow that same script. Eventually, this invisibility turns into quiet grief. Not loud sadness, but a sense of being overlooked in your own life. You begin to feel detached, even from people you care about. You might withdraw without explanation, not because you want distance, but because you don't feel recognized where you are. This is the final warning sign because it signals the deepest level of self-drain. You're still giving, still showing up, but there's little left connecting you to yourself. And yet, this moment also carries clarity. Feeling invisible is often the mind's last signal that something needs to change, not by becoming colder or less caring, but by allowing yourself to exist as more than what you provide. The question that remains isn't whether others need you. It's whether you've been allowing yourself to be known at all. If you recognized yourself in even one of these signs, this isn't a judgment. It's information. Draining yourself for others rarely starts as a mistake. It starts as care, responsibility, and the desire to do the right thing. But when giving becomes automatic and your own limits are never part of the equation, something important gets lost. Carl Jung said, "The most common mistake in life is to confuse one's calling with one's profession." In the same way, many people confuse their worth with what they provide. And over time, that confusion turns into exhaustion, resentment, and invisibility. Awareness is the first shift. Not fixing everything, not cutting people off, just noticing where you've been abandoning yourself in small, consistent ways. So here's the question I'll leave you with. Where have you been showing up for everyone else while quietly stepping away from yourself? If this resonated, let me know in the comments which sign hit hardest, or if you noticed a pattern you hadn't seen before. If you want more content like this, exploring the psychology behind self-sacrifice, boundaries, and identity, make sure to like the video and subscribe. These conversations matter, and you don't have to navigate them alone.